Hello and welcome to the Commander Theory podcast. I'm Nick Beatman, and today I've got a very special guest, Ethan Fleischer. Ethan was the winner of the second Great Designer Search. He led the vision design for Kaldheim, and he's the current representative for Blue in the Council of Colors within Wizards of the Coast's R&D. Welcome to the show, Ethan.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Blue in Commander, its strengths, its weaknesses, its power level relative to the other colors, and how Wizards is working to balance the color within the limits of the modern color pie. But before we get into the topic of Blue in Commander, can you tell me what it means to be the Blue representative on the Council of Colors? What is the Council, and what are the responsibilities of your position?
The Council of Colors is a group of magic designers that dresses up in color-coded robes and reviews every magic set to make sure that effects that should appear in one color don't appear in another color and vice versa. It's very important for the health of the game that players have to play different colors to get different types of effects. Otherwise, deck building becomes a uninteresting proposition. As far as my role, I'm the blue member of the council, so I'm responsible for looking at all the blue cards. For a long time, Mark Rosewater, who's the head designer for Magic, used to do all of this, but with the increased pace of releases, it just became impossible for him to keep an eye on the color pie as well as design a bunch of Magic sets and do the sort of PR type work that he does, write his article every week, and so he set up this council. So he's the head of the council, and there are 5 other members for each color. We have a colorless member, and Mark Gottlieb is also on the council as a senior advisor.
Very interesting. So in addition to looking over the cards, are you also looking at ways to explore Blue's design space?
That is true. We are always looking for new opportunities to expand colors in areas where we feel like the game would benefit from them expanding. The color pie is always evolving, and trying to direct that evolution is a lot of what we do on the Council of Colors.
How has Blue's color pie changed in recent years? What are some of the ways it's evolving?
Blue's pie hasn't changed a great deal in the last few years. I would say that the largest change for Blue has been with the increased focus on creature-centric decks over the last quite a few years now. It's been necessary to find new ways for Blue to interact with creatures in a way that allows you to disrupt your opponent in some way. So we've been experimenting with a variety of different ways of doing that over the last few years.
Interesting. That actually leads me to something I wanted to ask about Kaldheim, because it seemed to me that Kaldheim's blue removal was outside the norms of what we typically see in the color. We saw taking damage to get a better rate for an effect, as on Bind the Monster, and we also saw transformation type removal that hits non-creature permanents, like on Ravenform. So can you tell me a little bit about these experiments and if there's something that we might see more of in the future?
I think these are 2 pretty distinct types of removal. Bind the Monster is a top-down design because Kaldheim is based on Norse mythology. One of the famous stories from Norse mythology is when they bound the Fenrir wolf. And part of that involved a god having to stick his hand inside the wolf's mouth to let the wolf know it's going to be okay. We'll untie you. Don't worry about it. And then there was no, psych. We're not going to untie you. So he got his hand bit off. So that was the reason for binding the monster's damage dealing, which normally, as you say, we don't see that in Blue very often. So when we're reviewing a set, we're watching out for what we call breaks, which are serious strategic violations that shore up the weaknesses of a color in a way that is going to permanently damage Magic. And then the other thing that we're looking for are what we call bends, where we're sort of doing it a little bit differently. And if that bend is not being done for a justifiable reason, then that can be a problem. Please change it. But if the bend is for a thematically appropriate reason, then it's like, okay, this is a an appropriate bend, a thematically appropriate bend. So in an artifact set, for instance, a black card might bring artifacts back from the graveyard to hand, which normally black can't do that, but in an artifact set, everyone needs to interact with artifacts in some way, and that's a way that we've decided that black can interact with artifacts. So for Bind the Monster, this told a story from Norse mythology that we really liked, and so this was a thematic bend on creative grounds that we don't believe is going to cause any serious damage to Magic's strategic balance. Ultimately, it's a limited card it's okay, it's fine, but I don't think it's going to cause serious problems. Raven form, however, is quite different. So this is a card that exiles an artifact or a creature and gives that creature's or artifact's controller a 1/1 bird token. So this is something that we've experimented with a bit over the years in various sets. I think Pongifi was probably the first blue card that did something like this, and Raven form was particularly noteworthy in that it could do it to artifacts as well. We had a lot of discussions about Raven form both before and after the release of the set, and I think we've come to the conclusion that we probably shouldn't have printed that card the way it was, and not planning to print any more cards along those lines in the future at this time. Like, as I say, it's constantly evolving. We may change our mind again, but right now we're thinking that we'd like to keep those kinds of effects in probably more often on white cards.
Gotcha. Thank you for those insights. But you mentioned Pongify, and I just want to talk about that kind of effect a little bit more because Pongify, rapid hybridization, reality shift, these types of transformation type removal that we see in blue. Um, most of them haven't seen a ton of play in like standard or in other constructed formats, but in Commander, they all see a ton of play. Rapid hybridization and Pongify rank among the top 50 most played blue cards in Commander, according to EDHREC, and Reality Shift is actually among the top 15 blue cards. So all three of them see play in more decks than pretty much every Black Doomblade variant. So it sort of begs the question of like, how should blue spot removal fare compared to other colors? And when you're designing these types of transformation style removal, do you need to think about like how they balance out in Commander?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When Pongify and rapid hybridization were created initially, Commander was not a very popular format. It wasn't played very much relative to how it is now, and Standard was far more popular than Commander. And so they were balanced for Standard and for Limited, where a 3/3 creature with no abilities is. I'm not saying you would play a 3/3 with no abilities in a Standard deck, but it remains a reasonable threat that's worthy of consideration, right? In a format where you have one opponent who has 20 life, a 3/3 creature can't just be ignored. But in Commander, where everyone has three opponents with 40 life, a 3/3 creature with no abilities is just it's laughable. It's nothing, right? You don't have to worry about that really, unless you're down to 2 life, right? So it's just an illustration of how the power level of different cards is very contextual. And as Commander has become more and more popular to the point where it's the most popular Magic format, yeah, of course, we have to pay much more attention to how cards are going to impact Commander because that's the way Magic is played by more people than any of the other formats.
Gotcha. Philosophically, how do you think blue spot removal should fare compared to the other colors?
Oh, I mean, it should be in fourth place, I would say. I think that, green should be even worse than blue. But theoretically, if everything was, built from the ground up and we designed all of Magic all at once, black would be the best at spot removal, and then probably red, and then probably white after that, and then blue, and then green. But because we, release different cards in different sets that are often years apart from each other, those cards are never compared to each other in Standard, right? We've never seen Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push in the same Standard together. And so there's not been an opportunity to compare those two cards except in Modern, right? Where
Hmm.
we see that both of those see quite a lot of play. But neither one of those cards contextually is that strong in Commander, just because so many of the creatures in Commander are large enough that they can't be destroyed by either of those cards.
Gotcha. I want to ask you, we see that rapid hybridization in Pongifi is one example of a card that is more or less powerful depending on the context. How do the rules of Commander affect Blue's strengths and weaknesses?
Well, there are the rules of Commander, I think, tend to favor blue in a lot of ways because blue really has an advantage over a long game where you make lots of decisions and have a lot of turns. Because when you have 40 life for each opponent, that's, if you have 3 opponents, that's 120 life that you have to take down. Now, hopefully, your opponents are hitting each other as well, but this situation creates a game with a lot of turns usually. So that's to the disadvantage of more aggressive colors like red or white, and to the advantage of a color that can really build up a lot of resources over time the way blue can. Blue is the best color at drawing cards, and so you can really draw a lot of extra cards over the course of the game, and that can make a huge difference as far as your chances for winning.
Gotcha. I want to ask, a lot of the what we see of Blue in Commander and a lot of its most iconic effects in the format, like counter spells, permanent stealing, and clones, can be seen as more unfun by casual players because they punish people who are trying to do big splashy things or who want to play big powerful permanents. If you are like a green player and you spend 8 mana for a Vorinclex and your opponent's able to copy it with 4 mana for their clone or steal it for 4 mana with their control magic, it just makes it feel like you're disincentivized to do big fun things. How does R&D design blue cards that stay true to its color pie while creating more fun gameplay?
Yeah, we have been cognizant of that sort of pattern where blue punishes people for playing cool cards, right? You put a bunch of resources in this card, and we're now going to punish you in some way, either by stealing it or copying it, or just countering it, right?
Hmm.
Um, the sort of worst example of that, to my mind, is the card Bribery, that allows you to just go through an opponent's deck and pick the most busted card out of it and play it for free. So, which like it's just not a good incentive. When I'm designing for Commander, I try to think about more proactive effects, like what's a cool thing that this deck can do with the cards that are in it, and what's a cool combo that I can put together, or what's a thing that hasn't been done before. Um, so we've been making like more efficient, to talk to your specific examples of counter spells, for example. In general, I feel like we don't need a lot of new counter spells that are aimed at Commander. I think that people who want to play counter spells have plenty of choices. So usually when we're making counter spells, we're making it for the more competitive formats, because that's the type of player that's more likely to enjoy counter spells. So we tend to make counter spells that are a little more challenging to decide whether, when are you going to sideboard this card in, which deck are you playing it against, because in general, the player who likes counter spells also likes to make lots of decisions and kind of outthink their opponent, and has a competitive mindset. So we
Hmm.
try to optimize those for that kind of player. For clones, a lot of our clones lately have been cloning your own thing. So you can still make some sort of strange combo where you're getting multiple copies of something to do something unusual, but it's less likely to punish an opponent for doing something cool. And that just allows us to make them more efficiently costed from a mana perspective also, or put some extra cool little effects on it. What was the other one that you said? Oh, stealing things. Yeah,
Yes.
we try not to do that too much anymore. We do it a little bit, but in general, we try to aim those cards more at competitive play also.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for that insight. I want to ask a bit about the Commander Precons. You've been really heavily involved in them over the years, leading Commander 2014, Commander 2016, and most recently Commander 2020. What do you see as the purpose of those slots in the Commander Precons for new cards? Are they mostly intended to add, well, to add staple effects to the formats? Are they there to bolster the deck's theme? Are they there to just sort of explore multiplayer design space that you can't really hit upon in most standard sets? What do you see as the purpose for those slots?
Yeah, the purpose of those slots has evolved a lot over the course of my career at Wizards. At first, there were a lot of kind of staple effects that we thought the format needed in order to be a little healthier, to give people deck building options. And so you see some, like, a lot of mana fixing options, for example, in the early commander decks. Also,
Mhm.
we were worried that the product wouldn't sell in those early decks, and so you also see some designs aimed at Vintage and Legacy, which all of those cards are legal in Vintage and Legacy. You know, some of those designs were more successful than others, both, you know, on a power level standpoint, but also like an appropriateness standpoint. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think that True Name Nemesis has improved the world of Legacy by existing, but like maybe Containment Priest has. So that was sort of the early stages. But as we've gotten to the point where we are now, we're tying these decks to our main booster releases, so they follow the same themes as the main booster releases and have the same creative treatment. And it also, like, the power level of Commander has risen considerably. There are enough staples that you can play any color deck. You know, the format doesn't need that kind of help anymore. In fact, making more staple effects, I think, is actually just harmful to the format. So we're focusing much more on enabling people to build thematic decks, particularly ones that maybe weren't possible before, or that were very, very poorly optimized before. It's like, okay, you don't have quite enough ingredients to build a vehicle deck or whatever, and maybe we would do a vehicle commander pre-constructed deck at some point and give people the additional tools that they would want to build such a deck and make it a little more optimized.
I know I know it's been less than a year since its release, but I was hoping to ask a couple questions specifically about Commander 2020. Would you say that the experiment of tying the precons to a standard release and a specific world has been successful? Do you think that's something that's going to continue on into the future?
Yeah, I do. I feel like it's a sustainable direction, just because all of these sets are going to have different themes from each other, at least the ones that are, you know, near to each other in standard, and that gives us a lot of sort of options for different decks. And by sort of narrowing in on a theme that's in a standard set, usually that means that there's some support that we can find outside of that set for reprint cards, because you know, there are way more reprints in a commander pre-constructed deck than there are new cards. Finding there are some themes, like the mutate theme would be something that would be pretty hard to do if we didn't have enough new cards in the product,
Hmm.
right? Because there's no mutate cards outside of Ikoria. But yeah, in general, I feel like it's a successful direction and it's a sustainable direction, and it kind of helps us to find themes that otherwise, you know, we might end up going further and further out into wacky land and trying to always chase something that's completely novel. And you can do that for a while, but after a while you end up chasing into things that people don't actually want to do.
Gotcha. Well, I really like a lot of the effects that tying the precons to a specific set has had. It's great that it can take the pressure off the legends in the main set to all be commander playable. It's great that it can ensure that everyone who's really excited about a mechanic in the set is able to easily translate that into commander. But one thing that has been lost in tying the precons to a specific set is the sort of creative freedom to explore different places in the multiverse and maybe print versions of characters that hadn't seen play before? Or is Wizards going to be looking to other products to sort of fill that need going forward?
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's on my mind as somebody who is a big fan of all the old lore and the stories. I have a whole list of characters that I'd like to see in card form at some point. So, as we saw recently with Commander Legends, there are other outlets for that kind of thing. But yes, it is certainly a thing that is lost by doing the decks in this way, where they're tied to the creative of a plane that maybe we've never seen before.
Gotcha. I also want to circle back to something you'd mentioned a bit earlier. You said that it isn't really the goal of the new cards in the Commander Precons to be staples anymore. That printing staples in those slots, you think is a detriment. How well? Upon hearing that, it's hard not to bring up like Fierce Guardianship and some of the other free spell cycle that we saw in that set. Can you tell me a little bit about the thought process behind the decision to print those cards in the precons?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that as that those fall into that category of staples, and our philosophy has evolved, I would say, since then, so that to the point where I don't feel like those are appropriate anymore. It's a
Okay.
simple answer, really.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, like if I was making that product now, I wouldn't put something like that in there, I would say.
Gotcha. I also want to ask you about your time working on Commander Legends, and if you think this is a product we might see once every couple of years, like a Modern Horizons. Is this a one-time product? Could this be a yearly thing? How do you see Commander Legends, and how frequently do you think we'll get these Commander-focused draft formats in the future?
Yeah, so I was on both the vision design team and the set design team for Commander Legends. So I saw most of the design process as it went down. It's a very difficult type of product to design just because so much of the institutional knowledge that we have about what makes a good Magic set kind of has to be thrown out the window when you're making something for such an unusual format where you're playing usually four players. Everyone has a commander. Oh my goodness, everyone has 40 life. Just so and the set is huge, right? It's bigger than a normal set. So
Mhm.
it means that we kind of have to rethink everything we're doing all the time. Whereas normally there are sort of certain pole stars that are like, okay, that's true north. We don't need to worry about where true north is. We have the compass. It's fine. So from a design standpoint, they're very challenging. Ultimately, how often we're going to see that type of product will depend on what the sales were for the product. And, we've seen most of the sales that we're likely to see at this point for Commander Legends, but it is still, a product that's on sale that was released fairly recently. So we don't have the complete picture on that. And even if we did, I probably couldn't talk about it on a podcast. But, but as with most new type products, if players buy a lot of it, we're likely to make something similar again in the future. And if they don't, then it will go the way of premium deck series or what have you. I do think one of the challenges of Commander Legends are the partners, right?
Mhm.
Uh, I I get very nervous when I think about making any more partners than have already been made, just because you know every partner you introduce, has combinatorics with every other partner you've ever made. And so the more partners we make, the larger the chances of some broken combo between two partners appearing that we overlooked, and it damages the format in some way. So finding other solutions other than partner is something that I think about quite a bit when I think about potential future Commander Legends style products.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I think the total number of partner combinations is something around 1,500 at this point, and I mean, I don't see how you could easily balance for that with the amount of staffing power you have over there at Wizards. Like it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around even a fraction of that number. So I can see why you'd be wary.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that keeps me up late at night. Too many partners.
um, Well, I wanted to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? We've talked about a lot today, Blue and Commander, Commander Precons, Commander Legends. What else would you like to tell our listeners?
Yeah, just that I've really enjoyed working on Magic, but also just working on Commander. It's my favorite format by far, and I've had so many opportunities to work on it and see the format grow and become more and more popular. And I always knew in my heart that it was the greatest format, but seeing it become the most popular format has been very gratifying, and helping to introduce new people to the format by making all these pre-constructed decks is one of my favorite things to do at Wizards.
Well, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to continue this conversation?
Right, I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Ethan Fleischer, and I'm always happy to chat with fans about Magic or Commander or the color blue.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
With that, I want to give a brief thank you to our Patreon patrons. They are Bradley, Gustav, Ryan, Mark, Addison, Mason, Rick, Laser, Raphael, Kyle, Charlotte, Andrew, Tom, The White Clays, Aubrey, Hannah, Anthony, Andy, Dylan, James, Justin, Logan, Roger, David, Evan, Bryce, Dylan, Benjamin, Jason, Kyle, Jerry, Brandon, Eamon, Kevin, Matthew, Jamie, Russell, Kydell, Jeremy, Walter, John, and John. Thank you all for supporting the show. If you are not currently a Patreon patron but would like to become one, please check us out at patreon.com/Commander Theory. Thanks for listening. If any of you theorists want to get in touch with us, I am at Commander Theory on Twitter and Tumblr, and Zach is at Fat Bartleby on Twitter. Our theme song is Lincoln Continental by Entropy, and you can check them out on SoundCloud. Until next time, we're going back to the drawing board.